Hi student, this is for bca-4th-sem student and to topic is exception handling. Before going to exception handling, I want to say what is error. Error is basically wrong things that can make a program go wrong. Error may produce incorrect output or may cause the system to crash. Types of errors are compile type time error, runtime error. What is compile time errors? Errors will be detected and displayed during compile time, and this is called compile time errors. And example of compile time errors are missing semicolons, missing brackets in classes and methods, misspelling of identifiers and keywords, etc. And what is runtime errors? Errors will be detected, occurred, display during runtime. An example of runtime error are dividing an integer by 0, accessing an element that is out of bounds of an array, passing parameter that is not a valid range, attempting to use negative size for an array, converting invalid string to a number. So these are the runtime errors example. And this runtime errors is called exception. Another way you can say exception is an abnormal condition that arises in a code sequence at runtime. So here is the example. You can see int x equal to 10, int y equal to 0, int result equal to x by y. So there will not be occurred any compile time error because everything is okay. Any syntax or logical error is not present is here. So during runtime exception will be occurred because all of you know integer cannot be divided by 0. So here exception is occurred, and this is the example of runtime error or exception. So I want to say that different types of exception. One is arithmetic exception, two multi-pointer null pointer exception, single string index out of bound exception, number format exception, file not found exception. And first example was the arithmetic exception example because it is about the arithmetic condition, arithmetic logic. So this exception is called arithmetic exception where integer cannot be divided by 0. Next exception is null pointer exception. Here string name equal to null and you want to print position of string at 0, but your string name is null, so you cannot print the position 0 of your string. So it will show the error or exception null pointer exception. Next is a string name equal to Shumana. So length is 6 and you want to print position 9 of your string, but your string length 6. So how to print the position 9? So this string index out of bound exception will be occurred. Next example is file not found exception. Suppose in your computer sample.txt file is not present, but you want to access this file. So file not found exception will be occurred. Next is array index out of bound exception. Your array size is 5 and you want to put the value 32 in 9 position, but your program 9 position of array is not present. You declare the up to 5 position of array, so it will show the error array index out of bound exception. This is the main exception of different types of exception. And some of other types of exception: class not found exception, IO exception, no such method exception. Suppose you want to access any class but it doesn't exist, so it will show the exception class not found exception. Same way, IO exception. If you want to read some data but you cannot able to read the data, so it will show the exception IO exception. And another exception is no such method exception. Suppose you want to access method but it doesn't exist in your class, so it will show the no such method will occur. So here next is hierarchy of exception. You can see that throwable is the superclass where error and exception is the subclass. And error cannot be handled or controlled. But error can be fixed within compile time, within Java program, within any program in compile time. But error cannot be fixed during hardware or any configuration of software. So this is the way you can say error cannot be handled or controlled easily. Suppose example, your pen drive size is 4 GB and you want to store 5 GB file, but you cannot store because it will show the error. Your pen drive size is 4 GB, so it will not be stored. So error cannot be handled easily, but exception can be handled easily at a compile time, at a run time. So exception two types. One is unchecked, another is checked. Checked means exception will be handled at compile time. So that exception are IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception. That's it. And unchecked exception, it will be controlled or can be controlled or handled at runtime. Examples are arithmetic exception, null point exception, single index out string index out of bound exception, array index out of bound exception. And unchecked exception is the exception of runtime exception class. In runtime exception class is the class of unchecked exception, and exception is the class of checked exception. So this all about the exception. So now you are all of you familiar with the exception. Now I want to say what is exception handling. Exception handling is the mechanism where you can handle the runtime errors. So how to handle mechanism is managed by 5 keywords. One is try, catch, finally throw, throws. And this is the syntax where within try block you can write your exception, or you can here it cause the exception. Within catch block exception will be handled, and finally block after try catch block finally code will be executed. So within try statement that causes the exception, within catch statement they handle the exception, and within final statement code will be executed. So all of you see the this is the syntax of try catch block. Now I want to say that try with multiple catch block will be occurred. If you want to do this, means if you want to write try with multiple catch block, but order of catch block must be maintained, because suppose here exception is the superclass and arithmetic exception is the subclass, but you have to write multiple catch blocks, like first subclass and then superclass. This order should be maintained, but here exception is a superclass and arithmetic exception is a subclass. So here order will not be maintained. So automatically output will not be shown, because it will be occur error, because suppose 100 will not 100 cannot be divided by 0, so it is a arithmetic exception, all of you know. But exception class uh, cannot handle this arithmetic type of exception, so it will be handled by arithmetic exception. But here is present exception class, and after catching here this exception, it will not go to the arithmetic exception. But this class cannot handle this exception, so automatically error will be occurred. So you have to maintain first subclass then superclass, means you have to write arithmetic exception, then you have to write exception. After this order, you can easily handle the exception and it will be run properly. And so always when you can you can write the multiple catch block, you have to maintain the order. First you have to write the subclass, then you have to write the superclass, because types of all subclass can handle these types of exception, but superclass cannot handle all types of errors. So thank you all, thank you student. Next class will be on finally throws.